I recently read something that Margaret Atwood said on her Twitter, asked about current events. She said that she never puts anything in her books that did not happen in real life. And I was wondering, how does it work with your book? Because Ice is what some people are calling a cli-fi, with, you know, being a fiction.
Yes.
But when I was reading your book, I didn't feel like it was fiction. I didn't feel like it was pushing anything forward. I feel like you were not really painting a fictional picture.
No, it's based on what I found out from my research and from going to the Arctic, the Svalbard archipelago of Norway. And there is some speculative fiction in it, because I am not a climate change scientist, I'm not in the military, I'm not a tycoon of industry, but I have talked to all those people, several.
You've done quite an extensive research.
I have done a lot of research. I've talked to indigenous leaders, I've talked to people in conservation, I've talked to marine biologists, I've talked to hydrographers that work specifically in studying ice and climate change. I've talked to senior figures in the British military and other nations, some of whom didn't want to be acknowledged. And
they didn't feel like what they were saying would be well received, or
they wanted me to know. They gave me clues as to how to pursue a line of inquiry, but they didn't want to be thanked by name. So they helped me, but from a safe distance. So there is a lot of fact in this book. The structure of this book is based on fact. Yeah,
you start every chapter with a little excerpt from real documents or real accounts of people describing Arctic and describing what's happening in there. Some of those,
including Vladimir Putin.
Exactly. So we have who, as we know, has a very ambiguous view on what's happening with environment and such. But also, you wrote this book before US withdrew from the Paris Agreement.
Yes.
But were you anticipating such moves? Were you anticipating that things were going in this direction?
Well, I can't remember if it was Margaret Atwood. I think it was. It might have been her who said it's very dangerous for writers to aim at a moving target, and that is what I did in writing this book. But it's also important that writers aim at a moving target, because our world is not. We have a right to tell stories about what we see happening now, and not just accept it passively from watching the news. So when I went and saw with my own eyes and stood with my own feet on a new island revealed by the retreat of a glacier within a year, and the face of the glacier was maybe 200 meters away more, and it had retreated that much in a year. And I went out and stood with the documentary team on this tiny bit of rock, maybe 20 times bigger than the lovely bookshop we're now in. But it was definitely an island, and it was new, and it was caused by the shrinking of the ice cap. And something changed for me at that point, because I was not just witnessing it, I was living.
You were living it, yeah.
What's happening in our world. And I think that experience gave me the courage to write what was quite a scary thing to write.
But your book is, after all, it's described in Polish. In Poland, it's described as ecological crime novel. So the Polish equivalent of cli-fi. This is how they're branding it. So were you not worried that the crime bit or the fiction bit, the plot bit, would sort of overshadow the other parts of your story?
I don't think writers can afford to be worried once they start. You have to write the book you need to write and not think about how it's going to be marketed. It's a complex novel. It's a character-driven novel, first and foremost. It's fiction. I hope it tells a really interesting story based on facts, so that my readers can trust me and trust my research as a writer. And it's about something that matters. There is a crime element in it, but you could say that the way we live our lives could be considered a massive ecological crime.
Absolutely.
We're trying to use less plastic, and in future generations, you know, our great-grandchildren might look back and go, oh my God, I can't believe you threw away a cup every time you had a coffee.
Yeah.
The same way
what
now...
horrendous times you were living in.
You can't judge the past by the standards of the present, but we are living now and we can see what needs to change, and it is our responsibility to start to make the changes that we see are necessary.
But your book is...
Without feeling guilty.
Without feeling guilty, very much so. So your characters are a very important part of your book, and the way you describe them, the way they interact not only with that land they're in, and we're watching that land through their own eyes and through their own experience, as something that's close to everybody, not only to themselves. It seems to me that a lot of people might look at your book and say, oh, it's a book about Arctica. What do I have to do with Arctica? What do I have to... I've read books about polar expeditions. I'm not into this kind of stuff. Why would I read a book about that? So do you feel some people might say, this is so distant, you know, this is so removed from my life experience. How do you see it?
I absolutely understand that. And when I sat down to write this book, I thought, do I have any right to write about the Arctic? And I now feel I very much do, because what happens in the Arctic happens here, happens in Bangladesh. It happens to the rest of the world.
Just because we can't see it.
Yeah, sooner or later it will make itself felt in our lives, in everyone's life, whether you're trying to go skiing and there's no snow, or your summer holiday is flooded out by monsoons. And the world is getting smaller. It's a cliche, but travel gets faster and cheaper, and we can go pretty much, okay, when I say we can go anywhere we want, this is the rich part of the world that can go anywhere that they want. For people who are wealthy enough to take vacations, we can...
In outrageous places sometimes.
In outrageous places. We can now travel the globe. But this is a very rich situation, and we're living in times where people are moving around the world because they are being forced to. And one of the reasons they're being forced to is climate change. And one of the things that is factual in this book is a quote from Naomi Klein. You might have to check this.
Okay.
Who talks about the sacrifice zone. And this is an area, a band of the world where drought and famine and flooding happen most often, and it's also where religious fundamentalism happens.
So things...
there is a crossover in people suffering the effects of climate change and political unrest, and it's very hard to see the effects because we're in the midst of it. So we can't distance ourselves from it, even though we feel like we are so distant at the same time. So we feel we're too distant for it. So if the Arctic melting is changing the whole world, we are all affected, and we should all feel that we have a right to know how our governments are dealing with climate change, because sooner or later, and probably sooner, we are going to feel the effects. Well, probably much sooner, because it's already happening to us. Yes, but there is hope. There definitely is hope. The very fact that we're here in Warsaw today having a conversation about this book means that people are starting to care and think about reality. To realise that it applies to them in a way. Yeah, if you have a problem, you can't, well, you can turn away from it and hope someone else fixes it. No one's coming to fix it. We are the people who need to fix it. We're the only responsible ones. No one's coming. It's just us. No, it's you and me. There is no planet B. No, the troops aren't coming. We are the troops. So that's something that we should really take out of this book. I think this is something that really struck a chord in me, that the fact that we are the change, and we have the capacity to be this change for our planet, or we might choose not to be, because a lot of the characters in your book are quite divided on this, or they the quite... The central character, who is an anti-hero in the kind of 19th century sense, because I very much wanted I found it very interesting, yeah. I wanted this to be a deeply character-driven book in an old-fashioned way, where the main character is a mix of things that you respect and things that you think are despicable, because that is human nature. Absolutely. But that's not a very fashionable kind of character to write. at the moment. The book is not one thing or another, it is a complicated novel.
So why do you think readers no longer want this kind of books in their lives? Because, as you rightfully...
Well, I hope they do. I hope they want this book in their life.
Well, I absolutely do hope they want this book in their lives. And as I said to you before, I was very grateful to you for creating a characters like that, and to introducing us to the world that has more than one or two dimensions. But at the same time, I was thinking about what you said, that a lot of books are not like that nowadays. A lot of books feature characters who have one issue. They have one problem in their lives.
And
they have one desire in their life. And that makes the whole thing very flat. So why do you think people reach for books like that? Why do they find your type of character so intimidating sometimes?
That's a really good question that probably I'm not, as I wrote it, I'm not the right person to answer regarding my own book. But
not your own, but as
I think we are living in increasingly binary times. Things are good or bad, and you can vote on reality TV shows, in or out, good or bad, true or false, and the world is far more complex than that, and the Arctic is a really complex place. So we have to remember that the Arctic is a complex and large part of the world that touches different cultures in different ways. It touches people who are getting their goods more cheaply if there is a polar shipping transit route over the North Pole because the sea ice has melted, and some people will get their goods more cheaply. It's also a place where animals live, whose lives will be affected, possibly to the point of extinction, by that very thing happening. The Arctic is not a frozen theme park. It's not somewhere where the indigenous people are indigenous dolls for cruise ships and cameras.
Just to show off their traditions, just for cameras.
So we can't have a binary way of thinking. Climate change is bad, climate change is good for some people. Climate change is good, climate change is disastrous for more people.
Well, it's a very grey area, and possibly we will find out more about it.
Yeah, I
hopefully in the near future.
The conversation must continue.
Yes, absolutely. But moving on, I would also like to ask you what kind of stuff you read yourself, or what kind of stuff would you like to recommend to our own readers. So I know that you brought a couple of books to talk about.
I have. So this is what I'm reading at the moment. Polish novelist. How do you say her name properly?
Her name is Olga Tokarczuk, and that's the book Bieguni.
And it's brilliantly translated, I believe, and fascinating.
Oh yes, absolutely.
And it's a new way of storytelling, for me anyway.
So she and Jennifer Croft,
Jennifer,
the translator, they actually received...
They won the Man International Booker for this. And it's fascinating, and I'm going to start it again as soon as I finish to understand more about it. So I'm thoroughly enjoying and highly recommend this. George Orwell's Animal Farm. Anyone who hasn't read, please, it's a brilliant, seminal book that has changed me when I read it.
And really resonates probably now more than it has in a long time, hasn't it?
It's a timeless book because human nature is what it is. It works as a fable, a fairy tale, and a political allegory, which sadly is still current. But maybe human nature just doesn't ever change that much. I haven't read Mortal Engines by Stanislav Lem, but my stepson raves about it, so this is on my to-be-read list.
Have you ever read any of Lem?
I haven't.
Works?
I haven't, have you?
Oh yes, quite a bit, and I think you're going to enjoy it very much.
So I feel very ignorant for not having read this book.
There is too many books to read them all, so I don't think there's...
Life is too short, but I am going to read this.
No need to feel ignorant.
No, and a much-loved book, The Little Prince, which, again, human nature, and I read it as a child, I've read it as an adult. It's beautiful. It has pictures, and I love books with pictures.
Were you not compelled to put some pictures in your own book?
Yeah, there are pictures. There are pictures in this. I asked for wood engravings, and they're not in this one. They're in the other.
Hence my question, because I didn't have the original.
Yeah, I asked.
So there are pictures in the English version.
Yes, there are. There are little old-fashioned wood engravings, because in many of the vintage, if you like, first edition Arctic exploration books, they took artists on ships with them
Oh, so it's a nod towards that.
Yeah, very much so.
But were you not compelled to put pictures of Arctica itself or of what's happening there to illustrate it the way you illustrate it with little excerpts from?
I think it became a question of economics. So much about the Arctic does to put pictures in my book. But there's a lot more that I didn't write that I think I might write as a collection of related short stories as a companion. As a companion to Ice. This later, yes, and have pictures in that because I still have more to say, and maybe in a more poetic and lyrical way. Well, I very much hope to see it. Thank because you. The way you described it, that would be a perfect companion to this very thoughtful and very sensitive piece you wrote. So we really hope to see that sometime soon, and hopefully in Poland as well. Thank you. So Laline, thank you so much for seeing me today and chatting with me. Thank you, Aga. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. And lovely bookshop.